Well, thank you, Loretta. Thank you for inviting me to this spectacular conference. I must say I'm really impressed by the level of expertise that is united in this room, both on the panels and in the audience, and it's a privilege to be part of this. We will speak about Catalogue Raisonnées. Yesterday I really liked the statement by Flavin Judd against simplifying the oeuvre of an artist. And he said that calling Donald Judd a minimalist would be like calling every restaurant in the world a pizzeria. So if you want, as an artist estate, to avoid such simplifications, if you want to ensure that the oeuvre of the artist as a whole is remembered in its entirety, in its whole complexity, then a very powerful instrument and a very important strategy can be to publish a catalogue raisonné. It is a catalogue raisonné that compiles the entire oeuvre comprehensively of the artist, the well-known works, the unwell-known ones, the ones that are considered strong, the ones that are maybe considered weaker, the early works, the late works. So the only limitation may be that it may be limited to a certain medium. So, for example, all sculptures, all drawings. But apart from that, it's the comprehensiveness approach that makes the catalogue raisonné, I think, such a powerful instrument, because it implies statements on which works are part of the oeuvre and which works are not part of the oeuvre, which has a whole bunch of effects, such as, well, first of all, it will influence the perception of the artist's oeuvre, like in academia and in the market. It will certainly influence the market prices of certain works, and of course it does imply statements on authenticity, which means that it can be a very powerful instrument to prevent forgeries. And all these effects are what makes it such an interesting instrument for an artist estate to pursue. And we have now here on this panel 3 experts who really know what this subject is about. I would like to welcome Andrea Tyre, Arie, Hartog, and David Nash. And all 3 of them brought introductory statements to us. And I would like, as our first panelist, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Arie Hartog, the director of Gerhard Marcks Haus in Bremen. Arie Hartog is the chair of the German Association of Sculpture Museums, and has published and researched very much about the history of sculpture in the 20th and 21st century, and he's a true expert in in categorizing and also catalogue raisonné work on sculptures specifically. Among his publications, there's also the Bestandsaufnahme Hans Arp, and if you open that book, it says, diese Bestandsaufnahme ist kein Werkverzeichnis. So it's a status update that is not considered to be a catalogue raisonné, a distinction that you will have to explain us later. But Arie, we are very much looking forward to what you will tell us about catalogue raisonnés and sculptures. Yeah.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, it's very easy to put it bluntly. If there had not been a Gerhard Marcks Foundation and not a catalogue raisonné of the sculptor Gerhard Marcks, this artist might have been completely forgotten by now. Whereas vice versa, the being a catalogue raisonné enabled museum, estate, and the dealers involved establishing Gerhard Marcks as one of the main German sculptors of the 20th century. Everybody working on European sculpture knows the book. I will just make a few principal remarks on that book, because they may serve as a starting point on the question of a catalogue raisonné. In the early 1950s, Kurt Valentin in New York spoke of the 4 M's he was dealing with: Moore, Marini, Mantzou, and Marcks. And between 1945 and 1965, Marcks is undoubtedly among the most famous German artists, but like I said yesterday, in the 1960s, the fame is waning. And in this context, the idea emerges to bring the work into a foundation, and just as important, to publish a Catalogue Raisonné. These two ideas were very closely linked, as the artist saw them as a guarantee for his work to survive the death of the artist, to survive quarrels among heirs, and to survive periods of neglect. What if somebody would be interested in Gerhard Marcks in the 21st century? Where should he go? And the ideal situation would be to a dedicated museum and to a library. Both Marcks and his dealer, Rudolf Hoffmann in Hamburg, had been keeping book. Marcks, on his production on the left side since 1919, he made a list, and the gallery had records of all casts it had sold since 1948. Since the 1960s, Marcks had a foundry. It worked, a dedicated foundry, you could call it, Richard Barth in Rinteln, and it had also built up and maintained an archive on the works it had cast. So, compared to other sculptors, the starting situation seemed rather good. The problem, vice versa, was the amount. Marcks' handwritten list had, at that point, he was still living, more than 850 numbers, and the publishing house then suggested, well, why not just make a list? Such a list, and that's now into the depth of German art history, existed from the work of Wilhelm Lehmbruck from 1920. And everybody agreed, at least the art historians, not the publishing house, agreed that such a list is not enough. On the other hand, a much more elaborate book had been published on the sculptures of Ernst Barlach. But in Barlach's case, this had been prepared over a very long period and had been financed completely by the East German state. And the other very important thing, most of the sculptures by Barlach were not editions. And in Marcks' case, this was different. Of all works that were available after 1945, editions up to 14 had been made. So we are talking about thousands of bronzes. So it's very understandable that the publishing house was not interested in publishing them all. But artist and museum persisted, and in the end, a book was published that served three goals. First, in an art historical sense, it enabled an insight into the development of Gerhard Marcks as a sculptor. Second, it enabled the identification of each single object that had been produced until then. Of course, with such an enormous oeuvre, it was impossible to keep up the depth of information, but the book served as a standard, and the overall information, especially when it comes to provenance, is still correct. The third element served the artist and his dealers, as it not only presented casts that had been made, but also those projected. Especially the second and the third goal are often overlooked when working on a Catalogue Raisonné with a sculptor, but it turns out that those two not only help art historians and dealers, but even more the estate. In the case of Gerhard Marcks, the Catalogue Raisonné served as a clear guiding line for the estate, also after the daughter died, especially when new representatives were installed. The numbers of casts were fixed, and the estate has always been very clear, we are not going to change the numbers. But this situation developed where the work of Gerhard Marcks and his estate are surrounded by trust. And our museum that keeps tracks of development on the market and is informed by the estate keeps up the information for both scholars and all others interested. A decent scholarly Catalogue Raisonné, and that is, I think, is the most important point here to make, is the foundation for trust. And trust is good for the artist, is good for the work, and it's good for the estate. After 1977, we published a few other catalogues, and from this, the intriguing question arose whether there are rules. And of course, we heard every artist is different, but nonetheless, yes, there are rules. Oh yeah, this is the state we are in now. By now, all the information we have on Gerhard Marcks is going into a data base. In 2004, the Association of Sculpture Museums in Germany, a group of 40, mostly small museums, developed guidelines for the compilations of a Catalogue Raisonné for modern sculptors. It's a very small paper. It's 8 pages. I have it here. Everybody who's interested can have a copy or gets it per email by us. And it was thought of as an instrument that is both useful for specialists and also for people with less training. What we were discussing yesterday, if somebody comes and says, what am I going to do? What we always do is we give them these guidelines. Read these through and start compiling your lists. This small list is now being used by very diverse organizations and individuals. The last book was the Catalogue Raisonné on Catalogues. And I'm not going to present the whole list, as that would overspend time, and we had it translated anyhow now. But I will point out some typical problems just to think of that every Catalogue Raisonné on a sculpture is confronted with. And on that, our position is very clearly, you are free to do and think of alternatives, but please do not do it else than we suggest. As a lot of German organizations and estates have been using the guideline, we've made the experience that thinking through these 15 topics is much more important than the software question that is asked too often and too soon. Just to give you an idea, the critical inquiry of Hans Arp that was mentioned before, 3,500 objects, it's just one Word document. We never made anything else. So we just, started working instead of thinking of the software. And the point is, when you are working with that now, in this year, you just need some kind of merchandise management program. And instead of what you used to ask earlier, does your curator speak Latin or write Latin? Now you ask them, how good are you at DBase programming? So it's rather easy. There are 15 topics we should discuss when making a Catalogue Raisonné on a sculpture. And we know that the list is something of an ideal model, as for example, in the case of documentation, it's almost impossible to trace every single cast. Nonetheless, I want to point out a few things important for estates dealing with sculptures. Scope and sequential order. Everything that is an artwork by the artist should be in. If not, you get the problem of casts after plasters that were not known before. That's a very thing we hear very often. That follows from the idea of trust, and it's easy to imagine how mistrust develops if an estate is selectively or regularly presents new, unknown works, as is common with some sculptors. But even more important is sequence. It's very simple. Keep every sequence chronological. If not, you'll get something like the left side. And this is a good joke, but think of it. If you go through a Catalogue Raisonné, you will be amazed how often we are confronted with similar concepts like big works and small works, heads, torsos, portraits, still lifes, and we see this as an absolute no-go. Well, it makes perfect sense to work with themes when it comes to identification. It should play no role whatsoever in the sequence of a catalogue raisonné. So it's just a duck from 1935 and then a dog from 1956, although it's a different animal. We also advise you very strongly, in the case of sculpture, and even also in the case of installations, to use two dates. Always use two dates when it comes to editions. That is, first of all, the date of conception, and secondly, the date of the actual making of a cast. This is also a measurement of trust, because it's very clearly, are we talking about a lifetime cast, a posthumous cast? Until the 1990s, most people did not care whether a cast was lifetime or posthumous, but this has changed quite dramatically, as you all know. And by making this a part of your standard technical information on a bronze, for example, once again, you will create trust. And I could go on with a lot of detailed info, but like I said, we have this list with all the diverse points in it, and I would just suggest feel free to use it. These short remarks I just made indicate that a catalogue raisonné has a lot to do with creating trust. From a traditional art historical point of view, such a book serves to install an artist in the framework of art history. I think that nowadays there are many, many more reasons to make them, and having such a list, well, you might start today.
Yes, thank you very much, Arie. I think this, your statement is very helpful to understand the role of Catalogues raisonné and the trust as being the essential basis for understanding its role in the market and in working with the oeuvre of an artist. Now let me introduce you to David Nash, who will present our second statement. David Nash is previously from the auction world. He has been heading the worldwide contemporary and impressionist and modern art divisions of Sotheby's. He then decided to turn his back to the auction world, but not entirely, of course, and founded his own gallery together with Lucy Mitchell-Innes and Nash. You all will know this gallery, of course. And the Catalogue raisonné work that David is most intensely involved with is regarding one of the most important artists of the last 2 centuries, Paul Cézanne. And we are very much looking forward to what you can tell us from your experience there.
So thank you very much for that nice introduction. I'm actually here to talk about the history of the Catalogue raisonné of Cézanne, because it is something that has been ongoing for approximately 100 years. Paul Cézanne died in October of 1906 at the age of 67. He left a will in which he bequeathed to his wife Hortense and his son Paul Cézanne Jr., subsequently known as Paul Cézanne fils, the quite substantial contents of his estate. Among the contents of his estate were the famous Atelier des Louvres, just outside Aix, with its commanding view of the Mont Saint-Victoire, and his house in the Rue de Boulogne in the town of Aix, and numerous paintings and watercolors and drawings. During his lifetime, Cézanne, who was not terribly interested in money or commercial matters, sold the majority of his works to the French dealer Ambroise Vollard. Vollard was a huge champion of Cézanne's work, and he had quite a favorable contract with the artist to buy all of the works that Cézanne wanted to offer. In fact, if you look at Vollard's stock books today, you would see that this arrangement was very profitable for Vollard. But it is only fair to say that Vollard took a big risk when he bought Cézanne paintings. because it was far from certain whether Cézanne's work would achieve the popularity that it subsequently did towards the end of his life. Right after Cézanne's death, Hortense and the son, Paul Fils, sold 21 paintings and 187 watercolors to Vollard in half shares with another French dealer called Bernheim Jeune. And they sold these for about 275,000 francs, which was quite a lot of money then. There were many subsequent sales to Vollard and to other dealers, but the one that stands out was the sale of the most famous version of the card players, which Vollard bought from Paul Fils in 1913, and he paid 100,000 francs for it. 12 years later, he sold this for 1 million francs to Albert Barnes, and that was around, I think, about $105,000 at the rate of exchange in 1925. This was quite a very large amount of money. Although there was no estate tax to pay in France in 1907, there seems to have been a constant need for money in the Cézanne family. Hortense is reputed to have been a gambler, a rather unlucky gambler, and also she was very interested in high fashion clothes, so she spent a lot of money on clothes. So there were many, many sales after Cézanne's death, and I would say that by the outbreak of the Second World War, there were probably only a handful of works left in the Cézanne family. Everything else had gone. The first initiative towards making a catalogue raisonné of the artist's work was undertaken by Vollard just before Cézanne died. He attempted to gather together a complete set of black and white photographs, which he would send in albums to Paul Cézanne Fils, who would annotate them with information about the title, location, and date of execution, unfortunately not always accurately, in fact, frequently inaccurately. I think this is the artist that we're talking about. This is a late self-portrait. On the left is Madame Cézanne, and on the right is Paul Cézanne, fils de l'artiste. This is Cézanne's portrait of the dealer Ambroise Vollard, which he painted in 1899, which is in the Petit Palais in Paris. This is the card players that I was talking to you about, which sold for $105,000 in 1925. And now we come to the next topic, which is sponsored by the famous dealer Paul Rosenberg. In 1920, Leonello Venturi, a well-known Italian art historian, began to compile the first actual Catalogue raisonné, which was published in 1936. Considering how scattered the information was, the result was a remarkable contribution to Cézanne's scholarship. It does, however, contain a fair amount of misinformation, and Venturi was in the process of writing a revised supplement when he died in 1960. The task of completing the work was handed to the young German art historian named John Rewald, who had first published on Cézanne in 1936 and was just setting out on his career to become one of the leading scholars of the Impressionist and Post-Impressionist movements. And in 1983, John Rewald published his first catalogue raisonné of the watercolors. This is a photograph of John Rewald taken in 1979, and up against the bookcase you will see his typewriter on a stand. Does anybody remember what a typewriter was for? He was a very proficient typist, using only his 2 index fingers to write the entire catalogue raisonné, as well as all the other numerous publications, letters, and essays that he produced during his lifetime. This was the age of carbon copies and whiteout, And it was before spell check or the internet or carpal tunnel syndrome. So John's accomplishment as a two-fingered typist was remarkable. He spent nearly 50 years working on his magnum opus, the Catalogue Raisonné of Cézanne's paintings, but unfortunately he died before it got to the publisher. However, before he died, he named Walter Feigenfeld, from the famous family of German art dealers who brought many works by Cézanne and Van Gogh to Germany in the 1920s and 1930s, and Jane Warman, who had been Riewold's research assistant, to complete the almost finished work he had done and bring it to publication. The Catalogue Raisonné was published in 1996 in 2 volumes, but only 50 of the works were illustrated in color. I was quite a good friend of John's. We shared the same birth date, but 30 years apart. And when his catalogue was finally published, I was a bit disappointed in its appearance. It was a masterpiece of scholarship, but because all the illustrations were in black and white and were lumped together in a separate volume, it was neither visually attractive nor very user-friendly. For many years, however, it was the Bible of Cézanne scholarship, and for a painting to be either in or out of the catalogue could make the difference of thousands or millions of dollars. In 1996, after I resigned from Sotheby's, I began to think about doing a color supplement to John Riewold's catalogue. I toyed with the idea of finding all the color images of Cézanne's work that I could locate and using them to publish a color supplement. And now I had the opportunity. After a few years of this rather laborious exercise, I asked my friend Walter Feigenfeld if he would like to help me in this project. His response was extremely enthusiastic, and he proposed that we invite Jane Warman to join us and that we basically redo John's catalogue from start to finish. My original idea had grown considerably, and I started looking into the costs of printing the revised texts and about 650 color plates. The estimate came in at slightly more than the cost of a quite good Cézanne watercolor. So it was Jane Warman's idea that we consider a digital online solution. I didn't immediately warm to this plan, as I was always used to the idea of consulting printed books. And truthfully, I was quite looking forward to seeing this new catalogue in my library shelf with my name on the spine. However, when we had our first meeting with the designer of the online program, Roger Shepard from Opticon, who you'll hear about later, I was quickly convinced of the superiority of putting it all online. The advantages are enormous, and the flexibility it allows is brilliant. I love the traditional printed catalogue raisonné, but one of its drawbacks is that it begins to be out of date the moment it is published. Paintings change hands ever more quickly these days. New exhibitions are organized, new research is revealed, and so on. So when Riewold was researching Cézanne, he was refused access to the Barnes Foundation, which meant that he was unable to look at 63 of Cézanne's greatest paintings. And they wouldn't allow any of their works to be illustrated in color. Now, since that time, the Barnes has undergone a huge number of changes. They relocated, and they are now in downtown Philadelphia. It is a trip that I thoroughly recommend to anybody who wants to go and see it. They've managed to retain the feeling of the old Barnes Foundation, but in much better conditions, much better lighting conditions. You can actually see the works now. And this is something that, unfortunately, John Riewold, great scholar that he was unable to enjoy. And also, since the publication of his catalogue, a lot of other new information has surfaced, including access to all of Vollard's stock books. Since 1996, I would say that about 10% of Cézanne's paintings have changed hands, new owners. And all of these changes we've been able to incorporate in the online version. And even though it is now published, we can continue to make additions or alterations. And another feature of the online version is the ability to assemble or reassemble information that would otherwise be static. For instance, if you are researching, say, an exhibition of Cézanne in Paris in 1920, and the gallery that had the exhibition only has a printed list of the names of the paintings, you can in fact easily navigate through the program and download on the screen all the works in color in relative size that were in that exhibition, so you can recreate the exhibition exactly as it was. You can also download comparable paintings from a series and have them on the screen side by side, as seen here, in relative size. The issue of relative size began to become a running joke, and so this last illustration shows the three authors in relative size looking out from Bibemus Quarry onto the Mont Saint-Victoire. Oh. Yes, lower right. This is an example of how you can make a comparison between three separate still lives which are of different sizes, something that is very difficult to do in a printed book. So currently we're working on the Catalogue Raisonné of the watercolors, which we will integrate with the oils and expect to complete by 2018. The drawings will follow later. Access to the online catalogue is free. Since the publication of the oil paintings 18 months ago, we have counted over 7,500 registered users from all over the world. In our ongoing review of the authenticity of the oil paintings, we have added only 3 works which have appeared since John Riewol's catalogue. We have also downgraded approximately 20 paintings whose authenticity Riewol accepted or had never actually seen. And these are works that we initially categorized as traditionally attributed to Cézanne, and then after examination and research, we downgraded them to omitting them from the Catalogue Raisonné. Anything that we don't think is by Cézanne is not in the Catalogue Raisonné at all. This is very much a collaborative effort because we want to encourage other scholars to offer their opinions, to give their views on authenticity, give their views on the way the Catalogue Raisonné has been laid out, so that we've grouped it together in a certain way, so that all of the, for instance, all of the landscapes are together, all of the still lives are together, all of the figure compositions are together. And we're also very interested in inviting views on dating. Dating is a very difficult subject with Cézanne because he never actually dated anything and he kept very few records. So dating is very much a matter of opinion, and these keep changing all the time. One very interesting discovery, and I'm afraid I don't have a photograph of it, was an early view of Mont Saint-Victoire, quite a nice oil painting, which John Riewol had described as being sold by Knoedlers to the famous American collector Joan Payson. So I knew the Payson family quite well, and in response to my questions about this painting's existence, they said they never remembered it, knew nothing about it, and Riewol's information was incorrect. We went back a step farther, just on time. We went back a step farther and discovered that Riewol had said that the Payson family had bought the painting from Knoedlers. Knoedlers' records now belong to the Getty, along with Alan Caprow's archives. But we could find no trace of this painting anywhere. I couldn't believe that a painting of Mont Saint-Victoire his most famous subject, could simply disappear. The last known owner before Knoedler's was the Cézanne family, and after the outbreak of the World War II in 1939, the painting disappears. About 2 years ago, we got a call from the German organization that deals with war restitution cases. They had discovered this painting in the hoard of Wolfgang Görlitz, and they wanted to know if we had any idea how he had obtained it, which we did not. I haven't yet seen the painting myself, but I'm very glad that our Catalogue Raisonné has played a small part in restoring a genuine and unknown painting to Cézanne's oeuvre. So to anyone in this room who is interested in Cézanne, I do encourage you to go online and visit the site. The address is cezannecatalogue.com. Access is free, and all you have to do is to register your name. I think you'll find it's easy to navigate, and for Cézanne lovers, completely captivating. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Let me now welcome Dr. Andrea Tyre from the Royal Lichtenstein Foundation, who will speak to us about her experience from the Royal Lichtenstein Catalogue Raisonné project. Originally, she's from Germany. She now lives in New York. 6 years ago, you moved, is that right? And she has studied art history and psychology in Munich and Rome, has then done her PhD again in Munich, and has been working as an author, editor, and curator before joining the Royal Lichtenstein Foundation in 2002, where she started as the research associate, and now she is the Catalogue Raisonné manager who is overseeing the team that is recording the more than 5,000 works of Royal Lichtenstein. The floor is yours, Andrea.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Can you hear me? Hello, good morning. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me to attend this wonderful conference. I have the privilege to manage the Royal Lichtenstein Catalogue Raisonné, which is compiled by the Royal Lichtenstein Foundation in New York. I'd like to begin my presentation with a legal note stating that while I'm an employee of the foundation and in charge of the catalogue, I'm speaking today from my own experience and perspective. The Royal Lichtenstein Foundation was formed in 1998 after the death of the artist in September 1997. It is a non-profit corporation founded with various objectives. For example, to act as a resource for institutions organizing public exhibitions with Lichtenstein's work, or to help create awareness of his art and the art of his time, and of course also the preparation of a catalogue raisonné. The catalogue will cover the entire oeuvre of the artist, thus combining the various media like painting, sculpture, drawings, collages, etc., including prints, which are already documented in the Catalogue Raisonné of Prints, authored by Mary Lee Corlett and Ruth Fine. This book was published in association with the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., and an updated version appeared in 2002. Lichtenstein created about 5,200 artworks in total, dating from the 1940s up to 1997. There exists also a limited number of posthumous casts and prints. All of these works will be included in the catalogue, organized chronologically. Our research started 15 years ago in 2001. An online publication is planned for 2020, and we are thinking about publishing eventually some sort of a research summary in a printed book. In order to serve researchers and the public outside of our daily business, in 2002 we launched a preliminary, very basic online search engine of all known works by Lichtenstein. You will find it at www.imageduplicator.com, but our final catalogue raisonné will look quite different. Every record will provide, of course, a main image that reproduces the artwork, supported, when useful, by supplementary images like additional views. The description will include primary information like title, date, media, dimensions, inscriptions and marks, as well as documentary information and remarks where needed, followed by the usual provenance, exhibition, and publication history. Much thought goes into all of this. For instance, we are not only gathering each and every title an artwork was ever listed under, we are also creating new titles. This decision was made when we discovered that the studio inventories were not written with much attention towards titles, and Lichtenstein himself never paid too much attention to that either. And when we found that the exact same type of drawing was titled, depending on the case, a study here, or a sketch, or a preparatory drawing, we decided we needed to bring consistency and reason to these varying titles by carefully connecting studies and related finished works. Referring to exhibitions in literature, initially, our goal was to limit the ambitions and move faster by compiling just the first 5 shows and publications on our work. But the crossover activities at the Foundation did not encourage the enforcement of this aim. Over the past decade, the cataloging team has been simultaneously involved in preparing, researching, and updating data for exhibitions and publications, and we have been supporting all sorts of inquiries that come along with an artist who is widely in demand and whose art keeps being shown and reproduced around the globe. Of course, these activities have also been beneficial as we kept expanding our records. The result is a largely complete bibliography. It currently contains about 3,400 entries, and an exhibition listing that documents over 2,200 shows. The provenance histories in our catalog will still be only listed up to the year 2010, when the catalog was 10 years in the making, unless we already have later information on file. This cutoff date is one of our efforts aiming at bringing a Lichtenstein Catalogue Raisonné to the public within the next years. When the foundation was established, it continued to use the database TMS, the museum system, that had been set up during the final years of the artist's studio. Publishing a printed catalog was the obvious objective in the year 1998. Both database and publication plans have since changed. In 2010, the widely available internet and newly emerged technical possibilities for e-publishing had us rethink our goal. We decided to publish the Lichtenstein Catalogue Raisonné online. This will not only widen the opportunity for the public to get access, it will also be free. We will also be able to make timely updates without having to deal with the complicated business of printed editions that are outdated the moment you publish them. With the online publication in mind, we decided to transfer the existing data to a new user interface database called Panopticon. This online database provides a pre-structured, multi-layered system of entry fields and links, and you just heard about it before already, and will eventually allow for an easy uploading of our massive amount of data to a final catalog website. Since our transfer, we have been working closely with its creators on customizing and expanding the existing platform. A major focus of our online publication will be on visualizing the serial and referential aspect of Lichtenstein's work and his working practice. The artist used to create contemporarily groups of works, even entire work series, and he continued to refer to and revisit earlier work in new pieces throughout his career. Our final online publication shall be a complex tool that enables the reader to consult the data of an artwork and at the same time see the context in which it was created as well as exhibited or published. Eventually, we will also publish a summary of our research as a printed book. Every catalogue raisonné uses different resources and methods, depending on the material that exists, is accessible, or can be found. Our resources and methods include the following. In-house research makes up a big part of our work. The Roy Lichtenstein Foundation has rich holdings of different materials. It is an estimated 150 linear meters that include everything from artist studio files to loan forms to installation photographs to correspondence. We also consult about 250 oral histories that were conducted at the Foundation's request. In addition, the Catalogue team has access to a library with over 3,000 volumes, out of which about 700 were collected by the artist himself. Highly fruitful are our ongoing talks with the artist's assistants, and we greatly benefit from the knowledge of the artist's widow, Dorothy Lichtenstein. When we started to prepare the construction of provenance histories, we began with extensive external research. First of all, by examining the Leo Castelli records, which are stored at the Archives of American Art in Washington, D.C. Leo Castelli was Lichtenstein's longtime dealer, and the gallery's inventories and letters are core information when it comes to historic sales and ownership. We keep using various other sources, such as old phone books, online search machines, luckily they exist today, or even obituaries. Important resources are, of course, files at the various institutions that collect or sold Lichtenstein's work. And recently, we started uploading images of artworks with an unknown location to our website, and we are hoping to hear from their owners. Compiling and comparing, sifting through material, cross-checking data, and annotating information is a catalogue researcher's daily business. Everything we find or learn is added to either our files or our database. Of course, as soon as access to records or a database is given to more than one person, or more than one department, as it is the case in many institutions, including ours, it can become a Herculean task to keep information organized and transparent. It needs to be still clear and understandable when years have passed. What we learned is that confusion or doubts can mostly be avoided if everyone simply adds initials, a date, and the source of the comment or information annotated. Equally important is the organization of photography and images. The time spent early on setting up guidelines for photographers or on creating a precise labeling system will be rewarded once you are heading towards fine-tuning a final selection of hundreds, or in our case, thousands, of images from different sources and of different types and quality. From the beginning, the Foundation had set the goal to physically inspect and document every known work by Lichtenstein. In this slide, you can see where Lichtenstein artworks are currently located. So we have about 690 works at the Lichtenstein Foundation. Then about 500 works are located in museums worldwide, and the remaining 4,000 works are in private collections in about 30 countries. To get research started, a dozen independent art historians were hired part-time to start the search for and examination of works. These works had been assigned in groups, arranged by series or dates. This seemed to make sense from an art historical point of view, as each researcher would eventually become familiar with certain characteristics of a specific group of artworks. There was also the hope that distributed labor would make for good progress. 15 years later, we are working in a much smaller team, but far more efficiently. We found that the daily conversation and exchange of information within a compact team of connected and experienced people provides the groundwork for thorough and successful research. And in our case, physical examination is arranged best when works are assigned based on a researcher's geographical location. When I started my job as a researcher, I thought I would send out a letter or an email to a collector, followed by a couple of phone calls, and owners would be excited to have their artworks catalogued. The reality is that collectors tend to have busy lives. Some travel a lot, others insist on their privacy and do not want to be visited at all. All of this is just a fact and understandable, especially when it comes to concerns about confidentiality. At the Roy Lichtenstein Foundation, we make sure we pay very close attention to how we administer confidential information. For example, parts of our database are not accessible to anyone but the project manager, meaning me, and confidential correspondence in our files is either clearly marked as such or even stored away in a taped envelope. It is a good idea to send out a letter at the beginning of your inquiries in which you explain your procedures and confirm that confidential information will be kept strictly confidential. You may still want to prepare yourself for the fact that scheduling appointments for an artwork inspection might require patience, flexibility, and perseverance. The same is true for the setup and procedures of the examination itself. It may or may not go smoothly, you just never know. Sometimes a work isn't readily accessible because it is hanging under the ceiling, connected with 3 other works, and no one told you. Or you are presented with a multi-layered backing that requires time to deconstruct while you're only given 45 minutes for the entire visit. I remember moments of panic when we noticed that hanging wires weren't properly secured to the wall. Once I sweated through an appointment because we were not, under any circumstances, allowed to touch the wall on which the painting was hanging, which we had to deinstall for inspection. In all these cases, it was crucial that we only hire professional art handlers or paper conservators and experienced photographers who can move with caution while working fast. Luckily, there are also many gracious collectors out there who will insist on picking you up from a remote train station and then do everything they can to make your visit easy. They will sit down with you, all papers ready. They have made copies for you of any relevant information, and before you leave, they will do a quick phone call to their galleries to make sure there is no other Lichtenstein artwork in the area you should know about. After the visit, they will email you scans of newspaper clippings from their local library and maybe even continue to update you on a regular basis on Lichtenstein works they see in various places. I have been working with amazing collection managers, housekeepers, or even gardeners who helped out with bits and pieces or stayed late to accommodate the researcher whose plane got delayed in a snowstorm. In short, the physical examination of an artwork can be a pleasure, or it can come with a whole set of challenges. Diplomacy, determination, and quick decision-making may be needed. I thought I should document our daily work on the Catalogue Raisonné today with a couple of short case studies. They may be of interest for your own research. Connecting resources. A couple of years ago, we began to catalogue the artist's 31 known sketchbooks. In the course of preparing the examination, I read in the oral history with Lichtenstein's longtime assistant that the artist used to work on his drawings with the help of a set of small cards. Out of curiosity, I decided to ask the assistant about those cards, not expecting much. To my surprise, he pulled a hidden drawer in the artist's studio in Southampton on Long Island and handed me a small cigar box filled with dozens of cards in different sizes and with various dimensions scribbled onto them. And you see them here. The cards had gone unnoticed since the artist's death, buried between old pens, tapes, pairs of compasses, and other tools. Once we had inspected the small cards, our view of Lichtenstein's sketches changed significantly. We understood that the artist decided about proportion and the sizes of a work right from the very first thought. And the straight edges around the sketch were not drawn after a sketch was finished, but rather served as a leading structure from the start for the drawing that was to come. We took all of this as a lesson again for how important it can be to connect your resources. The level of examination. Our analysis of Lichtenstein's sketchbooks led us at some point to the question, how much detail should go into an examination? That is, where shall we go further and document a work in even more detail? And when has the moment come to stop? Before cataloging the sketchbooks with their various types of paper, with cutout pages and missing pages, we had described, measured, and photographed works on paper solely by documenting the full sheet and any relevant detail. Our research findings caused us to be much more attentive in order to grasp even minor differences. For example, the texture or the structure of a sheet. The use of a light during inspection became one of the practices we declared a must. One day, during the process of sketchbook examination, we happened to see a box that was about to be stored away. It was labeled blank sketchbooks and contained, as far as everyone knew, a supply of pads and sketchbooks Lichtenstein had purchased but never used. With our newly heightened research sense, we asked whether we may take a look at those books. And this was the moment when we not only discovered that some of them were missing pages, the use of the light rendered depressions by the artist's hand visible, and you see it in the center picture. It did not take long to conclude that one of the known loose drawings to the right was torn out of this book. So the blank sketchbook was not just a blank book after all. If that box with never used material had been thrown away, we would have lost interesting information. So always think about before you throw something away. And finally, archive review. I will close my talk with a case study which taught us that the answer to a question may already be sitting in your files. You may just not be able to connect the dots before you have gathered enough documentation on an artwork. In 1979, Lichtenstein drew a design for Amarant landscape tapestry, one of the many commissioned projects the artist got involved in over time. Amarant standing for American Indian, and this is a work of the series where the artist played with American Indian motifs and surrealism. The no longer existing art publisher Modern Master Tapestries in New York produced a series of artist tapestries which were in fashion in those days. They eventually transferred Lichtenstein's design to a weave graphic and sent it over to India, where an edition of 20 pieces was woven. We have a big correspondence file at the foundation that documents agreements and corrections and updates and then again changes to all of the above. Since none of the letters comes with an image or any detailed description, we had early on filed it all away under general information. Once we started to gather imagery of all the 20 editions every piece, we soon realized that each of them looked a little bit different. They are hand-woven items, of course, so exact matches were not to be expected. But here we found that certain areas of the tapestries differed entirely in color or even design. And you may see this if you look closer. Edition 1 and 2 of 20 are on top, and 3 randomly chosen examples of the other remaining pieces are below them. And if you look at the upper left corner, you will see that in the first and second edition, you have the diagonals at the sky behind the male figure. And at the last example, for example, there's just a white area, and there are various other differences between these editions. So when we discovered that, we concluded that a lack of supervision, combined maybe with the creative spirit of Indian weavers, must have been the root of these variations. At some point, we had collected enough images to set up one of our pinboards, which are so useful for research surveys. Whenever I'm asked about how much space do we need when we start with a Catalogue Raisonné project, I always say it depends on how much you can afford, but there can never be a table that's too big and never enough wall space to spread out once you start getting deeper into your research. So when we started pinning all these pictures to the boards, we noted that only the first 2 editions were signed, dated, and numbered 1 of 20 and 2 of 20. At this point, we decided we had to take another look at the correspondence files. And we found an agreement from July 1st, 1982, that states that the artist, and I quote, will receive 1 or commerce copy, meaning a not-for-sale copy, of the tapestry, now that the tapestry is to the artist's satisfaction, after several revisions he required, upon viewing the first 2 copies, and that the 3rd and final state has been fully approved, the artist copy has arrived from the weavers and will be delivered shortly. Well, with our new knowledge, we were now able to confirm that the 2 signed editions, 1 of 20 and 2 of 20, both dated 1980, while the letter is from 2 years later, 1982, are actually test pieces that Lichtenstein continued to correct until in 1982, a 3rd and final version was produced, approved, and shipped to him. Now we understood that the edition in the artist's estate was not one with randomly differing colors. Instead, it was really the approved version of this edition and not the first ones. In the light of this, we also grasped the reason behind the diagram, now at the National Gallery of Art in Washington. And you see it here, the 3rd one. We never knew what this meant and why it was kept. This design of a specific area at the bottom of the tapestry documents the changes Lichtenstein had asked for when the first version had been produced. When I was a student in the early 1980s, I remember a darkish corner in our art library where we rarely ever went to. It was the corner where big shelves were holding dusty books the size of bricks with tons of blurry black and white images, the Catalogue Raisonnées. Back then, I was wondering who in the world dedicated years, if not decades, of their lives to building something seemingly so dry and uninspiring as a Catalogue Raisonné. Well, as you can see, I ended up right in the midst of that corner. And I can report that my work is anything but dry or boring. It is rather like a practice that comes with everything art can gift you and anything art can challenge you with. It may not be transformative, but the artist's spirit, your most important source of inspiration and guidance, will certainly shape you. And with you, this unique endeavor called creating a Catalogue Raisonné. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. This unique endeavor of creating a Catalogue Raisonné has been illustrated by all 3 of you very vividly, I think. Yeah, you have called it a Herculean task, which I think everyone who has listened to you nobody here will deny it. And if I've listen to you, David, I would not even call it a Herculean task, but almost a Sisyphus task, because it's not sufficient to dedicate your own lifetime, but if there's Leonardo Venturi, who has done so much for this, and then comes John Rewald to eliminate the mistakes, and then comes David Nash to make it colorful and to include, yeah, sure, and to include further works that have, for example, shown up in the Gurlitt art trove, and to eliminate further mistakes. So I think it's obvious it's a constant work in progress, and it's a huge effort for anyone who is involved in it. So time-wise, you've said the Roy Lichtenstein Catalogue Raisonné started in 2001, and you're planning to finish in 2020. We wish you good luck.
Thank you.
It sounds like you're in a good way. Many people who hear this and who still have the Catalogue Raisonné for their artists still ahead of them might feel discouraged by this. So what can you tell us to encourage them? Why is it worth all this effort? And what makes it so important, especially for artist estates?
It's a big question. I would say, as has already been said today, that without a Catalogue Raisonné, you cannot really keep the legacy of an artist alive in a proper way. It's just the bedrock of art history, where everything starts and everything turns to. And so I would say that is a reason by itself to be motivated. Maybe from a personal point of view, it helps for sure at the beginning not to know what will happen to you when you start. And once you're deep in it, I think I once read that someone who has to work on a Catalogue Raisonné should have all kind of characteristical, should have a certain personality or interest. But I think what matters most, what that person said, is that the hunt itself needs to be both the attraction and the satisfaction. There's a lot about hunting facts and finding out about something, and this has to be something you have to be excited about, and then you will probably be happy even for 2 decades or 3 decades to be working on the same artist.
David, your presentation has been very illustrative as to where the concept of Catalogue Raisonné traditionally comes from, and I think the 2 Catalogue Raisonnés of you two, of the Lichtenstein Catalogue and also Paul Cézanne, very much comes from this traditional concept of the Catalogue Raisonné being done by an educated scholar posthumously, after the artist has died, and the artist has not prepared much during his lifetime for this, so it's putting together the pieces and the information that is still available much later and trying to live with what's there. Nowadays, I think we have a certain shift because there are so many artists who are already aware of this issue and the relevance of Catalogue Raisonnés during their lifetime, and the artist estates becoming increasingly involved already shortly after the death of artists who have not prepared anything during their lifetime. So what would you say is that, has this changed the concept of Catalogue Raisonnés and the meaning of Catalogue Raisonnés now for more contemporary artists, and how important is it for an artist estate to really trigger this yourself rather than involving others?
Well, we represent in our gallery several living artists. Quite a few of them are interested in a documentary archive already, and they're only in their 30s. So I think that artists are beginning to adopt the idea or adjust to the idea of documenting everything while they can, so that the Catalogue Raisonné process is much easier. And now it's so easy to do with electronic digital images. You can document every 10 minutes of an artist's life and every time he lifts a pencil or a paintbrush.
Will this change the level of detail then for that you will make available, or that Catalogue Raisonné authors?
I would think inevitably, yes, yes. So it's so easy to record everything now. It will change the level of detail, yes.
And then the role of the artist himself. Can this also lead to a sort of curating your own oeuvre, like we've seen with Gerhard Richter, for example, who would already now, still alive, not acknowledge anymore certain works or not plan to include them in the Catalogue Raisonné that are obviously from his hands, and where everyone agrees that they are from his hands. Does this, to a certain extent, this leaves the concept of Catalogue Raisonné being really the comprehensive resource that unites everything that is undisputably from the hand of that artist? And I wonder, like, let's say I'm a collector who has supported Gerhard Richter very early already and has bought works from him to support him. would you, as an author of a Catalogue Raisonné, not feel a certain ethical obligation towards me also to include the works that I bought, as one who really believed early in Gerhard Richter, to include the works in the Catalogue Raisonné to make it A, comprehensive, and B, also fair towards everyone who's participating in the market? Maybe a question for you, Arie.
Oh, that would be an interesting point for the comment. I mean, it should be in the list, and then it should be mentioned, well, yeah, this artist at one point decided that he does not see it as a part of his work. I mean, the whole question of authenticity, it was said earlier, it is about, is it what it is said to be? So a Catalogue Raisonné defines, in this case, what it is. And if the Catalogue Raisonné is about what the artist made, then it should be in. If the Catalogue Raisonné is about what the artist says he has made, it might be different. It's a very different. It's very important to start with a kind of a conceptual discussion of what has to be in and what is the consequence when we put certain things not in. Because not putting certain things in now means in the future that all kinds of things will turn up, and then people will say, yes, it's similar like that work where the artist said it's not his, but it is his. I mean, that's not the situation now, but in 40, 50 years that will happen. Because it's a rather intransparent situation to create them.
I can add something to this, which is the dilemma that the Jasper Johns Catalogue Raisonné is facing. The people who are working on preparing the Catalogue Raisonné are in some sort of a conflict with Johns because he does not want them to include his early works as an art student or as a young artist setting out before he achieved his sort of signature style. And this is very much a problem because they were by him. He's not saying they were not by him. He just doesn't want them in the Catalogue Raisonné. And the consequences of this, of course, are both academic and commercial. What do you do if you own one of his youthful works? But this is not new. You know, Bacon rejected a whole lot of works that he didn't like. Some of them he destroyed, some of them he didn't. But they now appear in the Catalogue Raisonné, even though he denied them.
Yeah. Roy Lichtenstein, for example, destroyed some works as well.
He did.
Think. And how are you handling these cases?
Well, we try to document those works as much as we can. We go through all the oral histories. Whenever someone says, you know, I remember in the 1950s, I walked into the studio and he was just throwing away something, so we note that. And then we try to connect the dots and see maybe some series don't have preparatory drawings, so those might have been those.
Connecting the dots on a Lichtenstein
It makes a lot of sense. You can do it forever. And we will try, to make probably a category somehow of destroyed works or disappeared works or something, or stolen works, obviously, which also falls into another category of problems.
Do these works actually exist?
The destroyed ones? Not to our knowledge, no.
So Jasper Jones and Roy Lichtenstein, like, where would be the limit where you would say, I would not act here against the will of the artist anymore? You know, for example, here, not far away from here is the Friedrich-Werdersche Kirche. Schinkel has built it, but then he did the whole concept, but then he was not allowed to build it with all 4 towers that he had planned, but only 2 towers. So he decided not to include it in his Catalogue Raisonné. What would you say? Is that a moment where you would stop and where you would say, if someone manipulated Lichtenstein's oeuvre and he took a decision like that, would you then allow him not to include it?
Well, luckily I'm not working on an artist who's still alive in this case. I don't need to discuss this with anyone because whatever we find will be included, of course, as long as it is authentic. And we will just categorize it accordingly.
So that's your definition from what Arie said. It's authenticity, and that's the only aspect that matters,
exactly.
To include it.
Yeah.
Let's speak about one more topic that plays a role for many Catalogue raisonnées also, and that may influence who is also working on it. And David, I would like to ask you about this. Let's talk about conflicts of interest. I mean, obviously, as an art dealer, you are not a market-neutral person. Also, artist estates are not market-neutral persons. There are interests involved, financial interests, also idealistic interests, academic interests can be involved. And how can you ensure to avoid such conflicts of interest? How would you build up the team to ensure avoiding conflicts of interest, and how can such cooperations work?
Well, in my own case, I am an art dealer, and I do trade in works by Cézanne. I don't think that in any way this conflicts with my opinions about other people's works, or with works by Cézanne which are submitted to us for authentication. There has been a long tradition of art dealers doing catalogue raisonnés, starting with the Lichtenstein Institute, who have produced maybe 25 very, very authoritative catalogue raisonnés. In fact, many of the best catalogue raisonnés have been done by dealers. Each of them, I suppose, has to come to his own sense of values about how he deals with the conflict. I personally don't have a problem with it.
And artist estates, how would you see the role of artist estates then if they trigger a catalogue raisonné?
I think it's very important that it is clear who has made the catalogue raisonné and what are the interests of that person involved, whether that is the estate, whether that is a commercial organization or whatever, it doesn't matter, but to make the kind of the background transparent is, I think, very good for everybody. That's about all.
Yeah. And then now regarding, like, this also concerns what teams to build up, what methods to use. Let me give you two examples of currently work-in-progress catalogue raisonné projects, and they both concern Cranach. There are two Lucas Cranach competing catalogue raisonné projects right now. One of them involves not only art historians, but also a full team of pigment analysts, restoration experts, and that's the Cranach Digital Archive, triggered by Gunnar Heidenreich. What are your thoughts on such interdisciplinary approaches? And also, what are your thoughts on involving really many experts? And that's the other Cranach project that is currently undergone. It's the Corpus Cranach project. It's the one that takes the sort of Wikipedia approach, where you would involve more than 100 international, worldwide Cranach experts and scholars who would work together in a sort of Wikipedia effort and bring together their different views and expertise. Can examples like this be like interdisciplinary work and then teamwork that really encompasses many, many team members? Can those projects be sort of role models for catalogue raisonnés, or do you think this is just experiments that will not work? Question to all of you. Whoever goes for it first.
Well, the point is that that is a complete different kind of a discussion, because the whole, we are in the discussion we are having here, where we're talking about artists' estates, we do know rather clearly who the artist is. And we have some idea of what he made. And that is what is one of the things of the Cranach project, is that it is so very complicated, of having such an enormous studio with all kinds of people involved, that it's a complete kind of different approach, whereas the idea to involve a lot more people is always good. But the specific art historical problems of a Cranach project are very different to the problems an estate is being confronted with, because we are not talking about the Cranach estate. Because we were
No,
talking.
obviously there is one.
No.
And there are very few documents or receipts.
Yes.
So.
And there are, so that's a complete different kind of discussion. But the idea that you open it up for all scholars who are involved, that could be very good. And in some cases of some artists, it could be also very helpful. Instead of just one person working on it, if a few people start.
Yeah, I think that's actually what we're inviting with our online catalog Raisonnées. For example, we won't have any essays for that reason, that we just try to give the facts and then invite everyone to make up their own mind and bring up their own ideas. And I mean, I think we would be delighted if there was a follow-up website with hundreds of researchers focusing on Lichtenstein's work based on the catalog we provide for them.
I get lots of collaborative comments on the catalogue. People call me up and say, this painting is not on paper, it's on canvas, and stuff like that. And if they're correct, it's very helpful.
So you cannot possibly involve too many people.
No, ultimately we have to make the decision if
The authoritative. Yeah. Well, let me now open to the audience. Are there any further questions?
Yes, there are.
On these? There are.
There are. Yeah, thanks very much. The discussion was extremely interesting. And I think the last couple of questions touched on the area that I wanted just to ask you to explore a little more, which is that obviously this is a moment of furious technical innovation in databases and online access and so on. But I'm wondering if you could point to any examples of some of the more hybrid new constitutions of Catalogues Raisonnées, which are obviously going to be necessary for artists in the more recent generations who have worked, in what's been called the post-medium condition, or they've worked in conceptual art or with ephemera or performance or time-based media. Obviously, Mike Kelly is one of those artists, but there are hundreds of others whose estates or even the artists themselves are considering making Catalogues Raisonnées. So the question, just to be specific, is you probably had the occasion to visit with and see lots of examples of Catalogues Raisonnées. I haven't yet. I wonder if you could point to any specific examples of innovation, hybridity in this area that look to be, not just creative and interesting, but actually very effective within the loose paradigm of the Catalogue Raisonné. Because for me, I think the model of the Raisonné really is itself going to have to is being rethought currently, and we're certainly going to try and do that at the Kelly Foundation.
Yeah, very interesting question. Who would like to take a shot at this?
Well, maybe from our point of view, in America, there's an ongoing discussion these days, I would say, especially in the Catalogue Raisonné community. So I always recommend to go to the CRSA website, Catalogue Raisonné Scholars Association. There's a vivid discussion going on. Once you're a member there, you will receive probably daily emails with people asking the exact same question and then 25 others answering and giving their ideas and experience, because by now the market is growing fast. There are many competitors, and you will probably have to find out yourself what works the best for your artist and your needs and your financial background.
My name is Sharon Hecker. I'm dedicated my entire life to Medardo Rosso, the Italian sculptor, and I wanted to ask you, because he is a very particular case, about gray areas, things that Mr. Valentin mentioned before, works with no provenance, no documents, artists who come to dinner and bring a gift, like Rosso used to do, where we just don't have the records to support it. Damaged or repaired works, works that present visual problems, works that are look wrong but are actually great because it was 100 years and he worked in wax and they sat on a heater and nobody can find the original owner anymore. I very much support the idea of scientific examination, because this has led us to be able to authenticate many works that otherwise wouldn't have been in the Catalogue Raisonné, and errors, general errors in the Catalogue Raisonné that I deal with on a daily basis. I'll just give one example, a work that was owned by Louis Vauxhall, the man who invented the word cubism. And it was and is still not recognized by the Catalogue Raisonné. And I contacted the Catalogue Raisonné Association, and they suggested to do a technical study and a historical study and to publish it in the Burlington magazine. And the work is now in the Reina Sofia Museum, but it is not in the Catalogue Raisonné. So just to talk about those complicated cases, especially in sculpture, where we deal with these things on a daily basis. And these are wonderful examples of great concrete things, but then you have all of that hard work in the middle where you just don't have answers for, and maybe not in our lifetime even. So if anybody had a comment.
The gray area.
I think a book gets, also a Catalogue Raisonné becomes more interesting the more gray area there is in it. But that's, you know, that's a very scholarly approach, I'm sure. But so I would always think, well, especially those things should be in because there is also discussion on it. And there is, and especially in the Medardo Rosso case, I think, you know, I'm not too sure whether the last word on that sculpture has been spoken yet. So. And so it's also very different when you're talking about, on the one hand, of artists who died a long time ago, or where you are, they have just died, or you are now building up your lists to work with later on. So that also makes a big difference.
And like many Catalogue Raisonnés include then this section works in discussion.
Yes.
Are you, for example, including such sections in your catalogue? And to what level of detail will you then, especially in the online context, explain what the status of the current discussion is?
May I mean, the interesting example in Germany at the moment is the Catalogues Catalogue Raisonné. It has been published a few months ago, and there is a Catalogue Raisonné or an appendix online to it where all the detailed information on every single cast in it. But remember, Kollwitz, the oeuvre is 35 sculptures, and the woman who has been working on it, it took her 5 years. So there you have an enormous depth of kind of information because they were able to, you know, to reconstruct that. And I'm not sure whether, I think it's always like, what are your possibilities? What are your means? How deep can you go in your information? That's the...
Yeah, and online media is certainly better than before in the printed version.
I was wondering on the connection you see between a Catalogue Raisonné and an authentication committee. In fact, I would pose the question here, is not the team writing up and curating a Catalogue Raisonné an authentication committee in and of itself? And because, I mean, writing a catalogue like that will raise questions of authenticity and will demand coming to an opinion on whether a work is authentic or not. So how do you see the link between those two things? To the extent you can say they're different even.
David.
Is that a question addressed to me?
I think so.
Yes, we do act as authenticators in a number of cases, but it's a bit like opinions about an old master painting. I mean, don't forget Cézanne died 110 years ago. He is essentially an old master, not much different from Canaletto. In that sense, a lot of the questions of authenticity have to depend on opinions, on connoisseurship. Obviously, the majority of his work is documented. There have been Catalogue Raisonnés, and but there are quite a large number of works which may or may not be by Cézanne, which have been accepted by certain scholars and not accepted by others. As I said in my speech, there are I think 20 or 25 works which Riewald accepted, which we believe, and we're not alone in this. I mean, we're not God saying this is genuine and this is not. All we can do really is summon the majority opinion. And there are quite a number of works which Venturi accepted, which Riewoldt did not, and then which Riewoldt accepted and we do not. And more information comes to light, and in a curious way, this Catalogue Raisonné has made this job much easier because you can actually look at the two paintings side by side on the screen. And you know, if you're looking at it from the point of view of a connoisseur, not from a documentary point of view or any historical point of view, but if you're just looking at the two paintings side by side, which are both supposed to be by Cézanne, it leaps out at you whether one is not by Cézanne.
Well, I'm afraid that we already have to close this panel. I know that there are plenty of other questions still here, and I think we should go on discussing this with the drinks that are waiting outside for us. Last statement, every single one of you, if there's something you think has not been said, should be said, you have the occasion now.
Well, so much has been said, so much has not been said, but maybe from our point of view, the most important thing is take your time, insist on taking your time for things, and once you're in the project, try not to get distracted.
Well, I would then here to oppose or give another opinion. I think it's very important to start. You know, to get started. One of the things is with Catalogue Raisonné, people, they discuss and they discuss and they discuss, but if you know, don't talk about it, do it.
And then take your time doing it.
Yes.
David, anything else to be said?
I would, not really. I would encourage everybody to look at our Cézanne Catalogue Raisonné. If any of you have any questions or opinions, please contact me.
We certainly will.
And there is the,
Thank you very much for this discussion.
I'd like one too. I'd like one too. Okay.